So folks, I've had the 1600 for quite a bit of time already. If you guys remember, I used to have the 1150 right over here. Something happened within the controller. It ended up causing the auger to keep feeding it, causing a pretty big fire. So Pit Boss ended up sending over the 1600 at no cost, no obligation, no nothing like that. They just said, hey man, I'm sorry that happened to you. Let's go ahead and upgrade you to a 1600. So I've had it for a while. I've had the updated controller as well. Seems to be working good. On the 1150, there were some pros and cons, sure, but these are a little bit more different on the 1600, and I'll go ahead and get to it as to why. We're gonna go over how it's been, some of the modifications that I had to do to address certain issues, and what my overall impression is of it. Let's go. I guess there's gonna be one thing that you guys might have already learned if you own a 1600, and that's going to be temperature fluctuation, temperature being too low, what have you. If that happened to you, or is still happening to you, this is what I ended up doing to address that issue. Let's get this rack out of here. So there's two things that I ended up doing. One of them is the obvious one right over here, right? And I ended up doing that one last. Why? Well, because whenever I didn't reach the final temperature of the cook, say I do, I don't know, let's go ahead and do 220, 230, or whatever the case may be, right? The controller might read 230, but the inside would read somewhere around 210 or so. So by blocking this off, I'll go ahead and put a better shot right over here. By blocking this off with some aluminum foil paper, it prevents this ambient temperature sensor. It prevents it from reading any of the air that leaks from right here to the top. Now, there is a gentleman that sells this plate that you just bolted down on the inside, and that looks 100% better. If you do foil, it's going to work, but just keep in mind that whenever you're trying to do the sear action deal, it's going to start moving this around. Eventually it might end up coming off. So you really got to put it in a very nice manner. I recommend just buying that deal that's in there, and I'll go ahead and provide a link on the description below. But if you don't have anything or anything like that, then just use foil paper. It'll work just fine. Now for me, I had this issue where the temperatures were low. I'd command about, smoke mode 180 degrees, and it would stay at around 150, 160. Sometimes it would dip down to 140s, 130s. So one thing I started noticing is that I would close it, right? I'd close it. It would struggle, even with the new controller, right? So then I pop it open like this for just a little bit. I want to say maybe about 5-10 seconds or so. Temperature will start climbing up. So I'm figuring, that's kind of strange, right? You'd think that the temperature would drop whenever this would go up. But one thing I ended up finding out is this. There's this heat diffuser or dust collector. I don't know what it is, right? They call it a heat diffuser. I'm not sure why or whatever the case is. But it's this big old thing. And I think it's so that none of this dust settles on the barrel. Right, it just settles on the actual thin plate that's there. So here's one thing I noticed, and you use the Easy Ash cleanout, 9 times out of 10, at least for me, anytime that I try to put it back in there, it would move the plate away, right? And it would cause some sort of blockage, not always. And the times that it did not create a blockage, it still created that issue, right? Where the temperatures would never get too high, right? And I almost feel as if that interfered in airflow some way. Not necessarily that it's being restricted on the intake side, but more through the exhaust side, right? Through the air coming this way. Most of the air would come out through here, but I feel something was restricting it, and I don't know how to explain it, because once I removed this, the fire started coming out really well, right? The fire just produced a lot better, and I ended up getting way more consistent fires, better temperature, better startup more than anything, right? Huge thing. So I got rid of that thing and I have not put it back in since. You know, I've heard some people doing that, so I said, you know what, it doesn't hurt to try. Boom, did it. Absolutely no problems. I love it. This thing has a small auger. It has the same auger size as the 1150. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you the first thing that I do for startup temps. First, let's go ahead and empty this out. There we go. Get you a handful of pellets, right? And just put them in there. About that much is more than enough. You do that, your startup temps are going to be fantastic. They're gonna spike up so hard and it's gonna stay, even in smoke mode, man. You put this amount of pellets in there, put it in, go smoke mode, it'll reach that temperature, no problem. And it's going to settle around the 160, 180 range. Remember, smoke mode is always gonna fluctuate. But if you go to like 220, 230, 250, 270, this is gonna get you there very fast and it's gonna maintain it at those higher temperatures, no problem. So that's that's the biggest tip I can give. And I'm not exactly sure if it's a con at all, but it's going to be real estate. Now, the 1600 does have a whole bunch of real estate. You got 3 racks. However, is it usable? That's up to debate. It depends really on what you're gonna do. Because if you're gonna do ribs, man, you have a whole bunch of real estate. Ribs, no problem. I don't know how many you can fit in there, but it's not going to be a problem at all. If you decide to put brisket, you're in for a bad time, man, because you're only gonna be able to, you're not gonna fit any down here. Let's just be real, unless they're flats, right? What I tend to do is, because I've been cooking fat side up a lot lately, is I get rid of this rack. I get rid of that rack, I put the brisket in here, no problem. But if I'm gonna, I recently started making sausages on the 1600 and I gotta tell you, man, I really, really love it, right? So I can probably end up putting sausages here, and on the third rack, no problem. So again, it might not be a con. It is to me, because if you hear the word 1600, obviously you're gonna think a whole bunch of real estate, and it does have it, but is it usable? Not in every scenario, man. Not all of them are cons per se. It really depends on how you look at certain things. Some people don't even care about the temperature. They just go boom, call it a day. I'll see you whenever I see you. I'll go off of temp, whatever. But those are things that I've noticed, right? It kind of follows the 1150 a little bit, but because this thing is a bigger smoker with more, you know, area, it's a little bit different. The other thing is that one of the reasons why I think that it has as much trouble as it does with temperatures is because the auger is the exact same size as the 1150. Same size. On the Rectex, they upgraded it whenever they went to the 1250 from the 700, I believe, from the 700 to 1250. They upgraded the auger so it can be much beefier, much bigger, feed more pellets, be able to take care of the entire area. On this thing, same size as 1150, man. If Pitball sees this, I'd really like to go ahead and see if you guys can upgrade that. On the Elite version, I know you guys upgraded the auger to a, what is it? I think it's a brushless motor for the Elite version, right? It doesn't have that noise or anything like that. Size-wise, I don't know the size of it, right? But this one in the 1150, same thing. Let's go with the pros. This thing is pretty awesome, man. Now, again, this might not be a pro to you, but it is for me. The way that it produces its smoke, right? With the fluctuations, whenever I put in smoke mode, it'll say that it's at 180, but it usually jump up and down from the 160, 170, 180 range, give or take. No matter what you do or modifications that you try and do, it's always gonna do that, at least in smoke mode. Once you go to 220 or whatever, it's gonna stabilize pretty good. It lets the pellets smolder for quite some time, right? It'll let it smolder, and you can see the video that I have right over here, or it's over here, one of the two. But I go over how the smoke mode works. Basically, it smolders the pellets quite a bit, which is why you get that inconsistent readings and temperatures. After a certain amount of time or whatever, then it'll start feeding pellets, create a fire, then it'll smolder down, and the chain continues, right? It's not a consistent fire throughout the entire time. It just isn't. Sometimes if you leave it in smoke mode and you open up the sear plate, you're not gonna see a fire. You're just gonna see embers, right? That's it. You're not gonna see, you know, fire and nothing. It might be a con for you, but it's not for me. So one of the best pros that I have for this smoker that beats the 1150 out of the water by miles is that it doesn't really have a hotspot, man. You know, I've used ambient temperature probes all across, right, the grates, especially when making sausages, because that was very, very important, man. You can't have a hotspot when you're making sausages. You just can't. One of them is gonna blister while the other one is barely smoking or whatever. So you absolutely cannot have that. And with me, I've checked this side, this side, this side, this side. I haven't really checked the top portion. I do not believe that there might be an issue with it. At least I don't think. But at least for these two, there isn't really much of a hotspot. Maybe 10 degrees or so or whatever, but it's been working well for me, man. I'm not checking with the controller on the 1600. I'm checking with a Fireboard controller. I like it a lot. It created a very good amount of smoke flavor onto the sausages. The sausages turned red. You don't get that if you don't have real smoke in there, man. Hopper size, I got no complaints, guys. It fits 32 pounds, but you can actually fit a little bit more if you top it off. I got no complaints about it. Works really good for what it is. That's great. It has a PID controller. It learns, right? Whenever I removed that deflector plate deal, it took a while for it to learn. I think it took maybe 2 to 3 cooks, long cooks, for it to learn, hey, you know, I gotta adjust to X, Y, and Z. Now I just plug it in, put the temperature in, it'll do whatever it needs to do, and it'll get there, no problem at all. So now that we talked about the tips, the tricks, some of the modifications that I've had to do, some of the pros and cons and everything, would I recommend this smoker? Absolutely. And I'm gonna go ahead and tell you why. I'll recommend this to the right person. What do I mean by that? Well, if it's just you by yourself, don't really plan on inviting anyone over or whatever, I recommend staying with the 850, man. 850 hasn't really had much problems, if any, right? It's a really decent size. You got the sear action, you got a top rack for ribs. Seems fine. Me, I needed a little something bigger, right? Because sometimes I'd host fights, football, or whatever. So at that time, I ended up choosing the 1150. 1150 I think was the perfect size for me. Sometimes I did want a little bit bigger, but you know, it wasn't often. And if I were to try and do sausages on that thing, it would just burn up, right? It had a very high hot spot, right? I think it was like 70 degrees if I remember correctly from side to side. So it wouldn't do anything when it comes to sausages. Now the 1600, if you plan on doing a whole bunch of ribs, a whole bunch of sausages, especially you guys right now, I'm pretty sure that, you know, the sausage video that I made of this 1600 was, you know, had some decent viewers, and it's still climbing right now. So I'm certain that people are interested in making sausages on a pellet smoker. This thing is for you, man. If that's what you're trying to do, this is 100% for you. You got 3 racks, you can do all the sausages you want, and you already know, based off of the video that I made, man, it's going to work 100% for you, no problem. So that's amazing. If you plan on doing a brisket fat side up, do it on this thing. The second rack is right off, I think it's about 3-4 inches off of the bottom rack. So way out of the, you know, the hot spot right there. So you can definitely do fat side up. I've done it quite a bit. Works fantastic, no problem at all. Still renders the fat really well. The best thing about this thing is that I have yet to find a hot spot. Maybe a little bit, maybe like 10 degrees, if that, but not really. And I think that's thanks to the way that the dome is shaped, right? The way that it's shaped and everything. Really good, outstanding. So if you're choosing between the 1150 and the 1600 and you're like, you know, maybe I'll host, you know, some events at my house, or maybe, you know, I want to make some sausages, or maybe I'm going to go ahead and put a whole bunch of ribs, get you this one, man. I think the money's going to be worth it. But just understand that you know, you might end up having to do the same mods that I did, right? And using those tips and tricks, it becomes second nature, so it's not really a big problem at all. Overall, guys, the customer service from Pit Boss that I've gotten, even before me telling them that I had videos of Pit Boss or anything, has been pretty good. You know, some people say, hey, it's hit or miss or whatever. I don't find that to be true. I mean, it could be, but even before me telling them that I had videos of them or whatever, they still talk to me just like a normal person, genuinely trying to help me. So I'll give them props for that 100%. Be sure to go ahead and like, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one, guys. Later.